In the pitch darkness of the Eastern Front from 1942 to 1945, Nazi soldiers listened with chilling horror to a quiet, ominous rustle, similar to the rustle of a witch's broom, which announced the approach of Soviet night bombers, nicknamed night witches by the enemy. This nickname, which inspired irrational fear in the enemy, was given to the 46th Guards Women's Aviation Regiment, which became the only all-female unit where all staff positions, from pilots to technical staff, were occupied by women, and flew more than 24,000 combat missions on tiny Po-2 biplanes made of plywood and canvas, which when diving they became almost silent. It was this unique tactic of stealth, combined with the boundless courage of young girls, that deprived the Germans of sleep and inflicted significant damage on the enemy, destroying equipment, warehouses, and manpower, and forever inscribed the names of these heroines in world military history. Preparations for Soviet women to become full-fledged participants in combat operations began long before the war, in the 1930s, when, thanks to the Soviet Union's emphasis on equality, women actively joined aviation clubs and trained in military affairs through paramilitary organizations such as Aviation. Aviation and setting range records were extremely popular at the time and had great propaganda value for the government. One of the most high-profile events was a non-stop flight on a Rodina plane in September 1938, made by a female crew of Polina Osipenko, Valentina Grizodubova, and Marina Raskova, who set a new international women's record by flying 3,695 miles in a straight line. The 4,010-mile flight ended with an emergency landing, during which navigator Marina Raskova, on the orders of the commander, ejected from the cockpit located in the nose of the aircraft to avoid death during an emergency landing, and spent 10 days in the wild taiga with a limited supply of food and 2 chocolates until rescuers found her. All 3 women became the first women to be awarded the country's highest award, the title Hero of the Soviet Union, and Raskova was nicknamed Soviet Amelia Earhart. Born on March 28, 1912 in Moscow into a musical family, Marina Raskova, who first entered the conservatory, chose her own path at the age of 19, starting in October 1931 to work at the Zhukovsky Air Force Academy Aeronautical Laboratory. In parallel with aerial photography, she mastered the profession of navigator, and in 1935 she graduated from the pilot school in Tushino and became an instructor in blind flights and a teacher of navigation at advanced training courses for commanders of the Workers' and Peasants' Red Army, actively participating in record flights. After the attack of Nazi Germany on the Soviet Union in June 1941 as part of Operation Barbarossa, despite the desire of many female pilots to use their skills, their gender did not allow them to serve in the Soviet Air Force, since military aviation was considered an exclusively male prerogative. Marina Raskova, using her fame and acquaintance with Joseph Stalin, was able to get his consent to create women's combat aviation units. In October 1941, the 122nd Aviation Group was formed under her leadership, consisting of graduates of aero clubs and flight schools of Aviation from all over the country, the 586th Fighter Aviation Regiment on the Yak, the 587th Bomber Aviation Regiment on the P-2, which was headed by Raskova herself, and the 588th Night Bomber Aviation Regiment on U-2. The pilots with the least experience were sent to the 588th Regiment, which, after the 586th and 587th quickly became mixed, remained the only all-female regiment until victory, which was the special pride of its pilots. The commander of the 588th Regiment was 29-year-old Evdokia Bershanskaya, an experienced pilot with night and blind flight skills, which is why the regiment was sometimes jokingly called the Duncan Regiment. The strength of the regiment in 1942 was 115 women, and the average age of the soldiers was about 20 years old, ranging from 17 to 22 years. In October 1941, grueling training began at Engels on the Volga, where the pilots honed their aircraft control skills day and night and studied combat tactics, while the men from the neighboring 899th Night Bomber Aviation Regiment looked at them in amazement. The girls were given sets of men's military uniforms and shoes, overcoats and boots in size 43, into which they put thick insoles, stuffed sheets and newspapers into the tops, and also ordered to cut their hair short. For combat operations, the 588th Regiment received the most fragile and defenseless aircraft, Polikarpov PO-2 U-2, two-seat plywood biplanes with two open cockpits, which were originally designed for training and agricultural purposes, for which they were affectionately called cornhuskers. The aircraft, with the exception of the M11 engine and instruments, consisted of plywood and canvas, which made it vulnerable to small arms fire. One direct hit, and it caught fire and completely burned up in the air before reaching the ground. Like a match, one former pilot described. The M11's 100-horsepower engine could only accelerate an empty plane to 120 kilometers per hour at a speed of 60 kilometers per hour when fully loaded. The aircraft itself did not have radio communications, modern navigation equipment, except for stopwatches and maps, a bomb bay, and any weapons other than TT pistols from the pilot and navigator, until machine guns began to be installed only in 1944. The plane was so small that it was not detected by radar or infrared radiation. The pilots adapted it for military purposes by personally inventing and designing bomb racks attached to the plane of the aircraft and abandoned parachutes in order to take the extra 20 kilograms of bombs instead, increasing the combat load to more than 150 kilograms of shells. Combined with the low altitude of no more than 500 meters, this made rescue by parachute impossible. The pilots also came up with their own sight, called the PPR, easier than a steamed turnip. Through a 40-centimeter slit cut into the skin of the right wing and the glowing tip of a perpendicularly reinforced pin, the navigator managed to accurately place bombs on target at night. On May 23, 1942, after completing its training, the regiment flew to the front in the Rostov region and became part of the 218th Aviation Division of the Southern Front. Division Commander Dmitry Popov, who called the arrivals 112 young ladies, was initially alarmed, but Konstantin Vershinin, commander of the 4th Air Army, insisted that they were full-fledged pilots. The first combat mission of the 588th Regiment took place on June 12 on the territory of the Salsk Steppes. Given the fragility of the aircraft, Evdokia Bryshanskaya developed a special tactic for night raids. The pilots operated near the front line, flying at the lowest possible altitude, from 50 to 1,195 meters, to avoid detection by enemy radars and anti-aircraft batteries, and over the treetops. When the target appeared, the pilot turned off the engine, and the biplane began to glide silently, like an owl, towards the target, creating only a quiet rustle of air flowing around the canvas, which the Germans mistook for the whistle of a witch's broom. To evade the German searchlights, one aircraft circled above them, distracting attention while the other approached the target, and then bombed the searchlights themselves when the other aircraft hit the main target. The Germans below could only hear the faint rustle of the air around the canvas wings. The sound resembled the rustle of a broom, and the Nazis nicknamed the bombers night witches. "These planes don't let us live. We can't make a fire either in the campfire or in the stove." The U-2s immediately noticed the fire and dropped bombs. "To avoid losses, we have to sit in trenches all night," complained the Wehrmacht soldiers. The women flew from 8 to 18 combat sorties per night, each lasting from 30 to 50 minutes, with breaks between them of 5 to 8 minutes required for the courage and heroism of the personnel shown in the battles with the German invaders. On February 8, 1943, the regiment was awarded the honorary title of 46th Guards with the honorary name Tammansky for the liberation of the Taman Peninsula. The regiment received the Order of the Red Banner for valor in the battles for Feodosia, and a rare military award, the Order of Suvorov, 3rd degree, for the liberation of the Polish city of Kevzlin. In total, the Night Witches received 21 commendations from the Supreme Commander.
During the war, 32 pilots died in the line of duty, including Marina Raskova, who died in January of the 43rd year, while 23 pilots and 6 navigators, 24 navigators in total, were awarded the highest award of the Soviet Union, the title Hero of the Soviet Union, which is more than any other women's unit. Including among them was Squadron Commander Evdokia Nikulina, who in 1943 also received the Rare Order of Alexander Nevsky, the only award that migrated from the Tsarist army. Evdokia Bershanskaya became the only woman in the USSR whose merits were awarded the Order of Suvorov of the 3rd degree. The regiment's combat losses amounted to 28 aircraft. Thanks to the efforts of the regiment's commissar, Evdokia Radkevich, who traveled to the places of death of the crews after the war with the money raised by the regiment, not a single pilot shot down behind the front line is missing. Their graves have been found. Shortly after the end of World War II, the regiment was disbanded, and most of the female pilots were not allowed to continue their military service. Many of them continued their studies, got married, had children, and achieved success in various fields. Regiment Commander Evdokia Bershanskaya married Konstantin Bocharov, commander of the Men's Aviation Regiment, and devoted herself to working for the Veterans Council. And Irina Rakabolskaya, former chief of staff, became a doctor of physics and a professor at Moscow State University, while Natalia Kravtsova became a member of the Writers' Union, writing hundreds of stories about the war.
In 1981, after the release of the feature film Night Witches in the Sky, directed by Evgenia Zhigolenko, one of the pilots of the regiment, the whole world learned about the heroism of Soviet pilots. However, in the post-war period, despite the Soviet newspapers praising their feat during the war, the achievements of women in the historical context were generally forgotten or obscured. The lives of heroes did not always go well. For example, in the autumn of 1992, hero of the Soviet Union Evdokia Nikulina became the victim of a robbery in Rostov-on-Don when a stranger who entered her house disguised as a journalist stunned a 75-year-old woman and took away all valuable military awards, including the Gold Star Medal number 4741. The crime has not yet been solved, and the stolen awards have not been found. In 1990, as part of the People-to-People travel program, a group of former female pilots of the American Women's Civil Service of the United States Air Force, WASP, traveled to the Soviet Union to meet with their colleagues during the war. During the meeting, which coincided with the 45th anniversary of the end of World War II, the Night Witches and WASP exchanged badges and gifts, called themselves Sisters in the Sky, and wrote 2 letters to U.S. Presidents George H.W. Bush and Soviet Mikhail Gorbachev, calling for a peaceful future for children and grandchildren. This meeting of 2 different groups of female pilots whose missions and military experience were different confirmed their common emotions and the patriotic duty they fulfilled in defending their homelands. Thus, despite the fact that the 588th Night Bomber Aviation